Hi everybody, not going to bother introducing myself because if you're watching this you're on the website, so you already know my name. I said I was going to do a series of videos talking about various aspects of motorcycle riding, motorcycle racing, etc. And this is the second one, and I'm going to tackle probably one of the more difficult subjects, which is going to be suspension. So in my humble opinion, there are 5 different areas of suspension. We have OEM, original manufacturer's equipment, which tends to be what you get on your bike when it comes out of the showroom. We have track day suspension, we have club racing suspension, we have national level suspension, and we have world championship suspension. And when you look at those 5 areas and look at the difference between the first set and the last set, what we're really talking about is quality of the product, the precision of the engineering, and the ability to adjust. They're kind of the main differences. And it varies. You buy your OEM suspension for your front forks for, I don't know, £1 a piece, whatever it is, and you could be going up to world championship level where you're paying 20,000 for a set of forks. So the pricing is massively different. But let's just focus on the more realistic world that most of us tend to live in. We go to a showroom, we buy our motorcycle, it comes out, it's got suspension on it, various manufacturers available. Now, what you've got to bear in mind is when that suspension comes out on that motorcycle, it's generic. So they've kind of already decided, unless it's a single-seater bike, that you might well be carrying a passenger. You might well have luggage. You might be humping across Europe. You could be doing short trips to work. It's so variable. And for the manufacturers, they've got to have a baseline. They've got to start somewhere. So the generic go-to place for them is 2 people, luggage, and doing a little bit of touring. Now, that's fine if that's what you do, but a lot of us don't. A lot of us, we ride alone, and I know I certainly do, because for me that's kind of what it's about. It's that my space for myself time. And if that is the case, then there's a damn good chance that the rear spring on the bike is heavier than what you need, and potentially the front springs are exactly the same. So these are factors to be considered as we go on. So yes, you can make adjustments to your suspension, you could soften it up, you can firm it up, but one of the real simple tests to do is to take the motorcycle, let it freestand on its wheels, and you stand beside it, alongside it, so you know it's going across the front of you, and rest the tank into your hips, and as if you were doing CPR on somebody. Put your hands one on top of the other, find roughly where you think the centre of the bike is, and push down hard, okay? And you might want to push down a couple of times. Get somebody to stand a few metres away from the motorcycle and look at it, and make sure that she's going down evenly front and rear. So when you're pressing on that centre point, you're not getting the back going down more than the front, or vice versa. That is a good starting point. If you're not getting that result of an even movement front and rear, then definitely your suspension is something that you want to start looking at. So what can we do if that's the case? Well, as I said earlier on, we can look at spring rates. So spring rates can be calculated to the weight of a rider and to the ratio of the linkage systems, etc., that are on the bike. So that might be a first port of call. Let's just take a situation that we've got quite a light rider. You might be 8, 9, 10 stone. In which case, the rear springs coming out of the factory, I suspect, is a bit too heavy. So are the fronts. So we can change the spring rates, and I'm not going to go into the sizes and stuff like that, because what's important about this video is I'm not trying to tell you about suspension. I'm just trying to help you understand a little bit more, so that when you are looking at this, you're asking the right questions of yourself before you go out there to the marketplace and start looking for stuff. Now, any road rider that comes into my workshop, certainly I would say to them, well, let's have a look at the spring rates, let's see if we can do something there. If you want to plush a feel from the front of the bike, and potentially from the rear as well, depending on what suspension's already on there. We can talk about changing the weight of the oil, the thickness of the oil that's in the front forks, that's in the rear shocks. Most racers are running down at 5 weight, most road bikes are running up 10 weight or potentially above. So that's another element that we can look at. And another area that we can look at is our front fork springs. Now, you can leave them as what we call progressive springs. Progressive springs simply mean you have a spring of a set length and the coils are a distance apart all the way through until you get to the last sort of third of the spring where the coils tighten right up. They're not evenly spaced anymore like these ones are. And so what happens is as the spring gets compressed, it gets harder for it to move as it gets down to the bottom, just to stop the bike bottoming out. You don't want the bike to bottom out, because when it does, you've effectively got no suspension. So linear springs is what we call them. Linear springs, same length, same size, can be the same resistance to them, but the coils are even all the way through across the total length of the spring. They're called linear springs. Now, oddly enough, most people will go to a set of linear springs, racers will go to a set of linear springs, certainly in the front, but they're not allowed to on the rear, which I've always found rather an odd ruling. And when I started working on the Moto 2 projects and developing those bikes, it suddenly became quite clear to me that how restrictive that position was. But going back to our road guys, so what are the things we can do? We can change the springs, we can change the weight of the oil, we could set up our sag, 2 types of sag, rider sag, static sag. So static sag is the bike under its own weight, just standing there, no stands on it or anything, just on the ground. And then we have rider weight when the actual rider is sat upon it. Okay, 2 different types of settings. There's a baseline for each one of those. Now, once you've got your static sag set up, which will be some preload adjustments, etc., then you can start to tweak some of the other little knobs on there to refine it. But in fairness, I think if you put the right springs on, put a lighter weight oil in it, and get the static sag set up on the bike, you're going to be pretty close to where you want to be already, and you don't have to start twiddling all those little knobs. Okay. The other thing that you've got to bear in mind about the difference between more upmarket suspension and what comes with the OEM bikes is the fact that the manufacturers tend to limit the range of which you can adjust. So let's just say the adjustment in real terms on race suspension was 1 to 10. You on your road bike have probably only got 3 to 7. And the reason is they don't want you to enter those outer parameters, because that could have a drastic effect on how the bike handles. So they're letting you play, but they're not letting you play too much. So bear in mind, again, that's one of the restrictions that you get with OEM suspension. But if you're only riding on the road, it's not particularly a big issue. So they're the things that you road guys can do to improve the bike. But the decision you've got to make is, well, do I ride with a pillion most of the time? Do I ride without a pillion most of the time? Am I doing fast riding? Am I doing about town riding? Am I doing the odd track day here and there? And that will all affect the way that the bike is set up. Indeed, you might end up with 2 different setups, one for tracks and one for roads. Then you move on to your racing suspension. So again, various manufacturers. We can fit cartridge kits into the front. We can fit better rear shocks, ones with valving that's more accommodating to the circuit, etc. And we can spend a few bob doing that as well. So it's something you want to be quite careful about in terms of your choice. And I always say to people, go for the better end if you can, because if you're going to make this investment, you might as well make it once and grow into it, rather than buying something that's a little bit cheaper and then thinking, you know, could have done with the next model up, and you end up spending the money twice, and you're never going to get back what you paid for your original stuff. So it's quite smart, quite wise to invest properly right at the beginning. We get up to national level suspension. You know, we're really pushing the boundaries now. Now we could be paying, you know, £4,500, £5,000 for a set of forks, and we get the World Championship, we could be paying 20 grand for a set of forks. So, you know, massive. When we decide we want to go track riding as our next stage, there's a couple of questions you've got to ask yourself. You go out, do your track day, just take the bike as it is, go ride it. You don't know what it's going to feel like, you don't know what the problems are going to be, so just go ride it, find those out. And you'll feel the restrictions as you gain more confidence and you gain more lap times. You'll feel that the bike maybe in certain areas is not doing what you want, or is not giving you the confidence that you feel, or you need, I should say. And that's very important. Confidence is one of the key things. Riding a motorcycle is 20% skill and 80% what's upstairs in your head. So these are important factors to consider. So we're going to go track riding. Now, as an example, when I ran the Triumph Triple Challenge, I'd have 30 riders out there on what were stock bikes from the manufacturer. 675Rs, had the O-lins on the rear, had the O-lins on the front. Good riders could get around a circuit like Brands Hatch Indy in 48 seconds. You know, it's not hanging about. 48, I think they're 48 and a halves or late 48s. That's not bad. So if you're going to a track day and you check your lap time, not that you're supposed to, but I'm sure many of you do, and you're sitting up at 53s, 54s, you've got to say to yourself, there is room in this bike yet, as it is, for me to improve without having to upgrade the suspension. Do not make the mistake of sticking all the bling on the bike before you go, thinking it's going to make you faster, because it isn't. The one thing that I've noticed over the years that people don't tune is the person sat in the saddle. I find that quite odd. If you're going to make that transition to track riding, then you do need to learn a certain set of skills that are going to be lifesavers for you on the track. So don't forget to tune yourself. It's not just about the motorbike. In fact, I would say you'd get more power, much better results out of tuning yourself than you will tuning the motorcycle, certainly at this stage. Now, one of the products that brought me and brought Tony Scott Motorsport into the marketplace was the sort of stuff that we'd been developing for the Moto 2 bikes. And I've got one of them here, this linkage, which you can see. So it's a triangular plate. If you look underneath the motorcycle, at the bottom of the rear shock, you will see something like this. And with it, you will see what we call a drag link. Now, on most road bikes, this is just a solid bar of metal. It's a fixed length. This one, of course, is adjustable. And then the linkage sits here. So what you'll tend to see when you look underneath, you see this one here attached to the shock absorber, this one attached to the swinging arm. This setup here is for the Daytona 675, whether it be the Moto 2, Street Triple, or whatever. That early configuration of how they did the swing arm underneath, this is what fits that. Now, I've changed the dimensions of these holes in here. And the reason that I've changed them is because it goes back to what we were talking about a little bit earlier. And that was progressive and linear. So on the rear shock absorber, you have that linkage underneath. You may remember I explained to you on the front that the spring coils get tighter at the bottom of the spring as the bike goes further through its stroke. And that's progressive. It's ramping up the resistance as it goes through its stroke. Now, these linkages designed by the manufacturer, designed to do exactly the same thing on the rear, because you haven't really got enough space on a rear shock to put a progressive spring. I mean, I guess you could, but no one's done it, so there's probably some real good reasoning behind that, or I haven't seen anyone do it anyway. So they use this linkage system to do that. Now, what you've now got to imagine is the scenario. You're going down the track, you're going into the corner, you've got all that G-force, all that speed, and you're leaning over and the suspension is trying to compress. Now, we've always tried to look for using as much of the travel of the suspension as we possibly can. If it's there, use it. I remember many years ago, we were running a training school and Mick Durham was there with us, and one of the questions I asked was, do you use the back brake? Because a lot of us racing guys don't. And his retort was, well, Honda put one on there, why wouldn't I use it? So I said, well, what do you use it for then? He said, well, I'll touch the back brake before I do the front to make the back of the bike sit down, and I've got less chance of it then wanting to go up onto its nose and the rear wheel coming off of the floor. And I thought, okay, right, yeah, perfectly good explanation, sounds right to me. But I still don't use my back brake, never have done, and I suspect there are many of you out there that are the same. But when we're in that corner and that suspension is compressed down, the ramping up effect, the resistance that you're feeling front and rear on the bike is trying to push the bike back up. But of course the G-forces and the weight of the bike and you and everything else is trying to force it down. And it just gets to this point where it kind of doesn't want to move. And then of course the only thing that's left then to move are your tyres. And that's where you get too much wear from. So when we were working on these linkage systems, we started off putting in I mean, this is the racing version. So we have two versions. The gold one is for track days. The red one is for the faster lads. You can still use them at track days, but it's designed for sort of advanced group riding. We reduced the compression on we reduced the resistance on these. That's what it's for. And so when we put the OEM linkage on and we went out, Cartagena we were, Alistair Seeley was in the saddle at the time, you know, on the pace, on the lap times. We got about, I think it was 18 or 19 laps out of a set of supercoursers before they were getting greasy and starting to move around. We then changed over to the red linkage that you see there, and we got 56 laps out of a set of tyres. Now, there are other factors that come into play here. We were on the Moto 2, you know, it's got the factory swing arm in it, factory chassis. It is all going to move about a little bit more. So I'm not going to turn around and tell you that you're going to get 3 times the tyre life out of using a linkage system like this. But I'll be pretty certain you'll get twice. Pretty confident about that. And when you consider tyres are £350 a piece, and these pieces of kit are effectively costing you £300 a piece, it doesn't take you long to get your money back. So they are an invaluable thing. Everybody in racing changes their front springs to a linear setup, but they don't change the rear because the rules don't allow. But that doesn't affect you track day guys, and it doesn't affect many of you club racing guys either. You can have that facility. There it is. That's what it looks like. If you want to know more, get in touch. So we've dealt with why these linkage systems are really useful. They lower the resistance, the tyre is not working quite so hard, and you're getting a lot more tyre life. And as dumb as it may, well, it's not dumb actually, it's not dumb, I don't even know why I said that. If you can get to the end of the race and your tyres are still good, you know, we've all watched MotoGP, it makes a world of difference. So unless your competition have got this, you're ahead of the game. And that's what racing is all about, being ahead of the game. So that's a very broad spectrum of what it is that you need to know about the suspension side. But coming back to upgrading stuff, like I said before, there's probably a lot more in you to being able to move forward and learn how to go faster before you start trying to upgrade the motorcycle itself. It's a really easy thing to do and throw a lot of money at it, and I shouldn't be discouraging you from spending money because I'm in the motorcycle business and I sell parts. That's what I do. But you know, I've made all of these mistakes myself, and I'm trying to help you not make them. And it does require an awful lot of control on your own ego when you come into this situation, because it's very easy to bling a bike up and spend a lot of money at it. I'm trying to say to you, take it a step at a time, ride the thing. There's a good chance that the standard bike is still better than you, and as you ride it and as you become more confident, as you train yourself, you'll get faster and faster, and every time you're half a second faster, the characteristics of the bike are going to change. It's going to feel different, it's going to react differently. and then you'll start be able to pin down the points that you need to look at. So, you know, am I hitting my markers? Maybe I need better brakes. Maybe I need better master cylinder. Maybe I need better pads. Am I getting to the apex? Maybe I need some geometry changes on the bike to help me do that. Is my bike pushing wide out in the corner? Well, maybe I need to change some settings on there. One of the things that I've always said to people that are looking at these linkage systems, and I have seen them for sale elsewhere, don't put these things without running the bike through a chassis program. Okay, I'm going to do a video on the chassis program. I'm going to show you what it's about, how it works, but essentially don't do it unless you run it through a chassis program, because when you put these things in, they are going to drastically change the geometry of your bike. As I said on earlier, the standard linkage in your bike is going to be a fixed length. This is going to be adjustable. The reason it's adjustable is so we can move this around to get the geometry of the bike exactly where we want it. And without understanding exactly what changes putting a linkage system like this into your bike has made, then quite frankly it's bloody dangerous. So don't do it, is what I'm saying to you. I offer a chassis program service. It's 99 quid. I think it's as cheap as chips. Send you a sheet, you fill it out, I input the data, see where the bike is, and then I can make certain adjustments in order to make sure that it is in the right place and it's going to be doing the right things for you. So we've talked a bit about suspension and how that works and what we can do with those areas. We can have a quick look at geometry as well. It's quite strange until you start looking at these chassis programs and start typing in numbers and making small changes. You just don't comprehend what's going on. So let's give you an example. We decide we want to make the bike turn faster, so we pull the forks up a little bit through the yokes. We might pull them 2, 3, 4 millimeters. Half a millimetre can make a world of difference. I can remember being in Oschenschlieben with Keely, and we adjusted his forks by half a millimetre, and he went from third in the race to winning the race. Now, you know, I know he's a very, very talented individual, but my point is that small changes can have big effects, or big enough effects to make the difference. And whilst at track days we're chasing 2 seconds a lap, you know, at World Championship level we're chasing 2000s, and little changes like that make a huge difference. What we also have to then consider is what we've done to the bike. So we've effectively dropped the nose down a little bit. So what have we done there? Well, technically we've transferred more weight to the front, which means we've taken weight off the back. Are we going to suffer traction problems? We're going to open the throttle and the back wheel's going to want to spin up rather than sit and grip. So that's one area to be considered. If we've moved the bike down at the front, we've also changed the ground clearance on our pegs. If your pegs are touching the floor or your exhaust system's touching the floor, making those changes is only going to make the problem worse. What else have we done? We've changed the centre of gravity. We've changed the rake angle, which is what we intended to do. But more importantly, we've changed the trail. And the trail is the one bit you really need to focus down on, because that is what makes the bike stable. And I can tell you now, by doing that, you've reduced the trail. You've made the bike more unstable. And this is what the beauty of Moto 2 for me is. And this is what so got me into this, and why I wanted to start Tony Scott Motorsport and bring this kind of technology to you guys out there on the street and on the tracks. If I want to negate those problems using a chassis program, providing I've got the bits of kit on my bike that will allow the adjustment that I need, for instance, if I want to change the rake angle of the forks, I don't drop the forks through, I move the headstock cup, which is sitting right inside of what the steering stem comes through. I can move that through 180 degrees and I can kick the rake, I can kick the rake angle out half a degree, I can bring it back half a degree. So if I go to a big circuit like Silverstone, I kick it out. If I go to a little circuit like Cadwell, I kick it in. Makes the bike turn sharper. But like I said to you, because I've kicked it in, I've changed the trail and made the bike more unstable. And this is where your yokes come into it. Because if you have adjustable yokes, and they're not big style adjustable, they're basically what you've got on there now, except the hole where the steering stem comes through is much bigger, and in there you can put inserts to change what we call the yoke offset. That's basically where your steering spindle is running through, and then you've got your two suspension legs here. Okay, we can bring those suspension legs closer to the steering stem. I will get the word out, to the steering stem, or we can move it away. That's called changing offset. And when we do that, we change the trail, and that's the stability of the bike. So you can still have a steepish head angle and a fast turning bike, but if you've got the adjustable yokes and a selection of inserts, then you can put those in to bring the trail back so the bike turns faster but still feels really stable. And this is where the chassis program comes in, because you can pop the different insert numbers in there, see what the trail figure looks like, and then all of a sudden you don't have to have a whole stock of spares there trying different things and trying to figure out what's best. It can take you to the solution very, very quickly. And when you're racing and you've got limited practice time and limited qualifying time, you need to really hit it first time, every time. So anyway, look, that was a fairly in-depth discussion. I really enjoyed talking to you. I hope you get something out of it. And until the next time we speak, enjoy.